Hi guys, we lost the conference. We're not supposed to have such a good time. I'm Panhellenic, I'm the Director Department of Physical Science, and I'm very honored to welcome you all to our panel above. It's a great pleasure to have so many people in different places. The extrovert international capital of this conference is a theme for overall academic strategy. This year we welcomed about 90 new graduate students, most of which attend our English-speaking master's programs on contemporary philosophy, science, ancient philosophy, logic, science and technology studies. It is important for us that this conference is not just about professors. It engages young researchers, junior academics, and esteemed colleagues from Greece and abroad. Without further ado, let me pass to the director of our philosophy unit, Professor Panhellenic.
Dear colleagues and students, as the head of the Division of Philosophy, I'm delighted to welcome you all to this conference, now being held for the 8th time, following its established biannual rhythm. Our conference continues to grow and improve. This year, English has been established as a second official language, a development that reflects our department's long-standing tradition. As the first department within the Greek philosophical community to recognize nearly 40 years ago the importance of integrating into the international scientific community, we remain steadfastly committed to this goal. The conference is officially titled Conference on Philosophy of Science, though I must admit this is a somewhat modest designation. As one can easily observe from the program, it is also a conference on philosophy in its broadest sense. In fact, it stands as the only philosophy conference in Greece that has become an established institution characterized by continuity and a commitment to academic and scientific excellence. Our department not only serves the philosophy of science, but also strives to meet the needs and interests of those who wish to engage with philosophy in its entirety, whether at the undergraduate or postgraduate level. In this context, it is worth highlighting the 3 English-taught philosophy programs launched last year and this year. As already Antoni said, these programs represent a significant milestone in our department's commitment to broadening the scope of philosophical education and engaging with the international academic community. Those programs include the Athens MA in Ancient Philosophy in cooperation with 3 other Greek universities, the MA in Contemporary Philosophy and Philosophy of Science, and the MA in Logic. Before concluding this brief welcome, I would like to extend my deepest thanks to the scientific community and the many anonymous reviewers whose efforts ensured the quality of the papers to be presented, to the organizing committee, its chair, our colleague Stavros Ioannidis, and all its members who dedicated hundreds of hours of volunteer work to make this conference a reality. And, of course, to our volunteer students who once again demonstrated that HPS department is not only an academic unit, but also a family. Their hard the possible, hopefully, success of this event. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Athens and welcome to the 8th Panhellenic Conference on Philosophy of Science. I wish us all successful proceedings and engaging discussions throughout the conference. Welcome.
So let me introduce our distinguished speaker for this evening, Professor Stéphanie Ruphy. He's a renowned philosopher of science, specializing, among others, in the metaphysics of science and scientific pluralism. She's currently a professor of philosophy at the University of Paris-Sorbonne. And today she's going to talk to us, pose a question for us, whether scientists should or should not be engaged, politically engaged. Let's join me and welcome, for a warm welcome to Professor Stéphanie.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very honored and pleased to be here tonight. So what I want to do tonight is to investigate possible tensions between doing science, doing research, and being politically engaged. So the question is, should scientists, but that could be extended to researchers, and should scientists become more or less politically engaged? Don't expect a clear-cut answer, but I will try to provide some consideration and arguments in favor of maybe the less politically engaged option. Okay, so why ask this question today? The phenomenon of being politically engaged is certainly not new, but it has intensified recently, especially in relation with climate issues or environmental issues. So it's certainly not new. The history of science is full of figures who are very politically engaged. Think, for instance, about Bertrand Russell or Marie Curie, who is very engaged in favor of peace. So there's nothing new under the sun. In the 70s, for instance, we also have a period of very strong political activism with the movement Science for the People, just to give an illustration of what happened in the past. But what is, I think, specific about political engagement today is that more and more scientists become politically engaged for causes or agenda related to their research topics. So Marie Curie was politically engaged, but not on a topic with indirect relation to her skills and competence. So there was no direct relation between political engagement and the epistemic legitimacy you have as a working scientist on a specific topic. So I'm going to focus on this kind of engagement, where there is a relation between your political agenda and your research topic, your scientific expertise. Just to give an example, you might be very politically active to defend the biodiversity in a certain context, and at the same time you produce knowledge on biodiversity in that context, so you do both. And also, for instance, you might be interested in defending some animal rights as a scientist working on, say, the behavior of animals. All right, so I chose to this image. It's not very often that, I don't know in Greece, but in France, it's not very often that scientists made the front page of the daily newspaper. And here, this is a very well respected climate scientist, Valérie Masson-Delmotte, who used to be one of the vice presidents of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. And very clearly, when she stepped down when she stopped being vice president of IPCC, she became very politically active. She very visible in the public sphere, making critique, recommendation, direct recommendation to the government, and so on. You may recognize some of you in the center with the white coat. You may recognize Rosa Abramov, who got, I think it was 1 year or 2 years ago, who got fired from her laboratory, which was the Oak Ridge lab. And what happened? She attended she went on the stage with the sign, out of the lab into the streets. So, I said what I want to do is to investigate possible tension between political engagement and expectations towards science in our democratic societies. So I will start with a simple distinction between different forms of political engagement, because as you can expect, depending on the form of political engagement, the tension might be different and stronger. And then I will try to map tensions with key elements of the cultural image of science, and I'm not going to be original at all here. So I will talk mainly about impartiality and neutrality. Why? That's for many reasons, but because, rightly or not, in the common image of science, those are considered as conditions of trust by other components of society. I'm not going to question this link. I think it's interesting in itself to talk about this tension. And I will add some more or less inclusive remarks on what are, from a normative point of view, what are acceptable or desirable forms of engagement of scientists in a democratic society. Okay, so let me start with a very preliminary remarks on this well-known distinction or common distinction between impartiality and neutrality. So I'm not original here either. I'm just drawn, for instance, with Glass Award. Impartiality, in this talk, I will talk of impartiality when it refers to grounds for accepting a hypothesis or result. And if you define impartiality or objectivity, I'm not going to make this distinction here, I don't really need that. Then you define some kind of value-free view of science, or at least, because there are so much interesting works in philosophy of science to explain us that this ideal might not be so desirable after all. So at least what you try is to keep under control in many different ways the influence of non-epistemic values, or political values, ideological values, cultural values, you name it. And there are many options on the market, if I may say, in philosophy of science, many interesting options, like you have somehow, and this is Helen Longino, to manage social value management, or you have more recently the new demarcation problem, which is to be able to sort out good influence of non-epistemic values from bad ones. Whatever the option or what the kind of thesis you define within this area of philosophy of science today, I think what is important is that what you need is actually to have enough reasons and arguments to make a case for a comparative advantage of scientific discourses over other types of discourses. So you might have to drop the value-free idea, but that's okay as long as you can keep those influence of non-epistemic values under control, then you can make a point for the epistemic legitimacy of science from a comparative point of view. This is a better bet than other discourses on the wall. Neutrality is something else. Neutrality is about consequences of a choice or decision, like when you accept a hypothesis, when you choose a research topic, and we come back on that. And if you define the neutrality of science, that means somehow that you have to go for a dissociation between the phase of production of knowledge and a supposed later phase of use impact of this knowledge. So I will come back on that. This is, in the background, you have this kind of linear model of science and its application in science and innovation for a particular case. And just to illustrate very easily this contrast, you certainly expect a judge decision to be impartial, but a judge decision is certainly not neutral. It does impact, can have far-reaching consequences. Okay, just a bit more about impartiality. There are many well-known sources and studied in philosophy of science to identify possible sources of lack of impartiality. Arguments challenging the value-free idea of science. In a previous session, we talked a little bit about the inductive risk argument. Also, this this huge influence of non-epistemic values, especially, for instance, the now classical proposition by Hélène Longino about the fact that it's via background assumption in a confirmation relationship between observation and hypothesis that non-epistemic values step in and influence the very content of the scientific inquiry. Not in another domain, but a little different way of speaking about this influence, this permeability. You have also it comes more from the research integrity sphere and discussion. Questionable research practices, the long list of well-documented practices that may lead to lack of impartiality, selective reporting, cherry-picking, and all sorts of cognitive biases. And just to name a few, intragroup favoritism, confirmation, well-known confirmation bias, Austri's effect on all that. So this is very well documented, and this may explain why you end up with a lack of impartiality. Okay, so the question for me tonight is not is political engaged scientists lacking impartiality. It's again a comparative approach. So where do we risk having more of that? More of the questionable research practice, for instance. When do we risk having more of that? A higher risk of lack of impartiality. Is it the case that we risk having more of that when the science is conducted by scientists having strong political views or defending a particular political agenda? Another question, which is of course very central, is the perception by other components, not by us researchers in academia, but by other components of the society. Is it the case that there is a perception of an increased risk of lack of impartiality when scientists are politically engaged and publicly so? And I won't have, this is mainly an empirical question, and not surprisingly, I won't have much to say about that. But I know there are studies made of that, but as far as I can tell, it's contradictory for the moment, so it's not quite clear what is the impact. But this is certainly a key question, and but no answer from me. Sorry. Okay, one note down about neutrality now. I really like this. I took it from Philip Kitcher's book, Science, Truth and Democracy. Tom Lehrer is a mathematician and a singer, but I'm not going to sing because I'm a very bad singer. I just quote, when the rockets go up, who cares when they come down? That's not my department, says Werner von Braun. We remember the importance of the work of this German engineer for the development of the V2 rocket. Okay, this is a very common public position taken by some scientists. I just quote another one from the Nobel Prize for Medicine. Let's be enthusiastic for science again, we can witness a lot of things. This trust is often justified but on the interface between men and science. Men meaning, scientists, the other areas of society. Not of science itself, which is neutral. So it's still a very common view in public debate about science. A more philosophical formulation of the same idea is what Philip Kitcher calls the myth of the purity of science, and this is an extract from Science, Truth and Democracy. The scientists seek to establish truth about nature. How the resultant knowledge is used is a matter for moral, social, and political debate, but it is intrinsically valuable for us to gain knowledge. If the circumstances in which knowledge is applied are likely to generate harmful consequences, then that is a sign of defect in the social view that surrounds the sciences. So this is really it captures what it needs to be able to define that science is neutral. For many reasons, it's quite difficult, but we can discuss that of course later. For many reasons, it's quite difficult to defend the neutrality of science, and I will just briefly point to two types of arguments to reject the neutrality of science. One comes directly from Philip Kitcher following this first thing. So I'm sorry, this is I realize this is a very early slide. I just mixed French background. I didn't have to change so but anyway, sorry for that. Messy slide. So just to point to this argument by the teacher, he draws up his notion of significant graph of a research project. This is a conceptual tool to make very clear and explicit the fact that most research projects today, at the very beginning when they are conceived and elaborated, when you ask money, you intertwine, when you conceive a research project from the beginning, you intertwine, you entitle epistemic aims and practical aims. And the example that Philip Kitcher gives in his book is the research project on the cloning of mammals, and Dolly is the first sheep, clone sheep, who made the front page of a newspaper. It's not very often that she made the book of a newspaper, and but not the first one that cloned, but the first one that could be shown on the newspaper. And so anyway, so when you think about what is the significance graph of this kind of research project, you have from the beginning epistemic aims, to advance knowledge in fundamental biology, and at the same time also various practical aims. And this kind of argument to reject the value, the neutrality of science, stands in contrast with the traditional, what we can call cascade or linear view of science and its application, where you conceive science as primarily being in the business of filling a reservoir of knowledge, and then other components of society come and pick what they need in this reservoir of knowledge. This cascade or linear view of science and its application doesn't hold anymore, neither descriptively or normatively. Okay, so I just to illustrate the kind of consideration in support of rejecting the neutrality of science. This is an editorial from Nature a few years ago. It starts from the acknowledgement that the needs of millions of people in the United States and elsewhere are not well enough served by the agenda and interests that drive much of modern science. In other words, the starting point of this kind of consideration is that there is a gap between science outputs and society needs. So we just black box society needs. Lots of things to say about that. We don't need that for the rest of the talk. And so the cascade model, which might have been good at some stage after World War II, or to produce what is expected from science, is just not good anymore. Because historical science will tell you that it was never the case, at reducing this gap. And, okay, so just to resume, we can just acknowledge that most scientific programs today are in the Pasteur quadrant. So this comes from this very nice book by Stokes, Pasteur's quadrant, basic science and technological innovation. So you find the distinction between three kinds of science, depending on consideration of use and quest for fundamental understanding. So you find, of course, pure basic research, when consideration of use is low and quest for fundamental understanding is high. You find the traditional applied science in here. And if you think about it, most research programs are, I think, better described are being in the Pasteur quadrant, use-inspired basic research. Why is it the Pasteur quadrant? Because Louis Pasteur is very well known for, of course, very fundamental insight in microbiology, but also at the very beginning of when he conceived this research question, he was very concerned about the use, the utility of his work. Think about, of course, fermentation or vaccination, of course. And this is really interesting to see how Louis Pasteur not only writes scientific papers, but wrote letters to any powerful people at the government in France at that time to make sure that his fundamental insight developed in a useful practice. Hence this notion of use-inspired basic research. So let's be in this quadrant for the rest of the talk. So I will move now to this distinction that we propose between different kinds of political engagement. This is a kind of continuum. It's not like it's one or the other. Okay? So let's start by the most obvious form of political engagement is when, as a researcher, at the same time you are an activist, a political activist. So this is usually described today as activist research. I put some form of citizen science here. It could be closer to the stream of research part, but I come back to that later. So this is obvious. This is obviously a form of political engagement. Also quite obvious is when you leave your lab and become an expert in the sense of you become involved in a political decision process. Not political, but a decision process. So you leave your lab and you go in the outer world, on a TV set, as an advisor of whatever, whoever. And so this is also a form of political engagement, and quite obviously so, I believe, but we'll come back on this, also this form of political engagement. The last form I will discuss today is choice of research topics. This is certainly not perceived as a form of political engagement, but I do think this certainly, at the end of the day, may be the most impacting form of political engagement we can have as researchers. Okay, so let me start with this. This is not exhaustive, I don't know, but this is what I need for the rest of the talk. Okay, so let me start with this less obvious, this form of political engagement, which is not perceived, or I don't think it's very commonly perceived as such. So one reason you may see it as a form of political engagement is what I just said before. So I go back to this slide. So if you grant that the goal of science, that a goal is for scientists, the goal is to reduce the gap between science outputs and society needs, that means that the issue of the choice of research topics is central as a political engagement to try to reduce this gap. And this is explicit, for instance, in this editorial in many documents about that. Okay, so this is going to be in the background. The fact that you do expect, as a scientist or as another member of the society, you do expect to do something about this gap between science outputs and society's needs. All right, so let's go back to this question. Is there a tension between this form of political engagement and expectation in terms of impartiality and neutrality? And this is the question we're going to ask for every form of political engagement. I don't see any particular risk of an increased lack of impartiality if you choose a research topic because you think it's really important to produce more knowledge on this research topic. For instance, you choose again to work on a certain issue in biodiversity. Usually it's because you want to define biodiversity, but that doesn't mean it. But in itself, I don't see any particular risk of an increased lack of impartiality when you choose a research topic again, depending on your political concern. There's a strong non-neutrality for sure. Strong non-neutrality because, depending on the research topic, you will produce certain kind of knowledge. And as firms are with perception by scientists and also by other members of society. Engagement qua scientists, what do I mean by that? It's because nobody can do it for, well, of course, depending on your scientific institutions, on where you are in your career, how much influential you are in funding bodies at the European level or at national level. So, of course, not all scientists have the same leeway, so the margin of management depends, but we are still in situations where researchers have something to say about research priorities, even if they are not the only ones to set research priorities. So this is an engagement qua scientists. That means that nobody else can do it for you. So let's now ask two questions, two related questions. Quid of a lack of global impartiality, and I will explain that in the next slide. And quid, this is related, and quid of a gap between researcher preferences as regards research priority and the preferences of other components of society. And this is I think, a very important, check the time. I'm short-sighted, I can see. Okay. So this is an important democratic concern. I will come back on that later. So what do I mean by a risk of a lack of global impartiality? So a very telling illustration of the notion of global impartiality, or a certain kind of global impartiality, has been provided, for instance, by Naomi Oreskes. And this is about deliberate strategy of production of ignorance. And we have this very nice book about documenting how the tobacco industry produced ignorance in the following sense. It didn't produce bad science, it produced ignorance in funding only certain dimension of the scientific program of the causes of cancer. For instance, putting a lot of money in studies of genetic basis of possible genetic basis of having lung cancer, and with the consequence that not so much knowledge was produced about the link between smoking and having lung cancer. Okay, so this is very interesting historically. This is well documented, and but what I'm more interested in is cases of global impartiality that do not result from a deliberate strategy, like bad guys saying, let's not study that for protecting our interests, you know. So the challenge is, I think, and it's a crucial form of political engagement for us academic world, is to avoid neglecting research topics because they are not deemed interesting enough by scientific communities and or research funders, be they public or private. We all know that, you know, there are power relations and economic, social inequalities and that run through our societies. I'm not saying anything original. And that can mean very concretely that some phenomena are studied more than others without any deliberate strategy behind that. So, I won't discuss that, but a way to cope with that would be to set up an observatory of negative research topics, but that will be maybe for discussion and depends really on the national political analysis. Okay, so why don't we, when I was saying we, say the academic, the research, public researchers, why don't we get more politically engaged to try to avoid the neglected research topics? Well, an easy, but also we can also explain, an easy answer, and I think the key answer is that the current internal reward system of scientific communities doesn't help. And I like this quotation by Daniel Sarek. It's a bit radical, but it's from saying science. Advancing according to its own logic, much of science has lost sight of the better world it is supposed to help create. Shifted from accountability to anything outside itself, the free play of intellect begins to seem like little more than a cover for difference and responsibility. So this is just the idea that if you think about what we value between peers, when we hire people, when we give advices for funding, that might not be, we value certain kind of papers, certain kind of journals, nature, science, literature, philosophy, all very nice journals, it's not the point. But our criteria are not centered on the question of does that help somehow to reduce the gap between science outputs and society's needs. And so there's a kind of second-order engagement for us researchers, which is engagement in the way we, the auto-governance of research, to change the evaluation in terms of incentive and reward system of science. But that's not my kind of digression. Let's come back to the main discussion. Second form of political engagement, involvement in public life, political life as an expert. And so the main point I want to make here is that as researchers, we can choose between different roles as experts. It's not that there's only one kind of expert. And I'm going to draw directly on this typology proposed by Roger Piper in his book, The Honest Broker. So this is 4 idealized modes of engagement. But I like this typology because it's built from different views you may have. First, on how you conceive the role of science in society with 2 big options, and we'll come back. And second, what is your view of democracy? Because we all know that there's not one view of democracy, and we can have different options about that. So just very quickly, concerning the view of science in society, you find again the linear model. This is this idea that the goal of science is to fill in a reservoir of knowledge, and later we might have a laser or anything useful or not. Okay? And the stakeholder model is different to the extent that from the very beginning, and this goes back to Philip Kitchell's graph of significance, for instance. From the very beginning, the way you formulate your research question is in relation with stakeholder interest. So the users have some role from the very beginning of conceiving a research program. View of democracy, 2 options in this typology. First option, interest group pluralism. That means that you have competing groups, groups of people engaging with different interests, different views, and this is democracy, engaging one another in political debate more or less peacefully. And so it really depends on the time of history and how you live with that. And I don't agree with France also, it doesn't fare so well these days. Okay, so there's, or you can have a different view of democracy, and you have all sorts of mechanisms to cope with this antagonism of pluralism. You vote, you try to find a consensus and all that. Another view is the elite conflict view. What does that mean is that this is the idea that the public is to choose between various options, alternatives, that are conceived and formulated by experts. And the experts have to clarify the implication of the different options. It's the example people gives is when your car is broken, or it's not in the epistemic real, but your car is broken, you go to a car repair, and you're not the expert, he is or her, she is the expert, and so you are proposed different options to repair your car, but you're not, at the beginning, you're not involved in the kind of options that will be proposed to you. You're facing a choice made by the expert. Okay, so as a scientist, depending on your views on that, you may choose to remain or not to remain, to be a pure scientist. What does that mean? That means that your focus is on research, this is a linear model, with no consideration for its use or utility, and without connection with decision makers. So again, is there a tension with neutrality and partiality, or the same thread? Neutrality, you have that for sure. No increased risk of lack of impartiality for sure, and I think a strong perception of impartiality. Okay? Another way to be an expert is to go for the science arbiter form of expertise. In that case, you answer positive scientific questions asked by decision makers, usually you sit in the forum committee, and you avoid normative questions. Again, neutrality, no increased risk of lack of impartiality, and I don't know about the perception of that. Okay. Roger Pilker's favorite option, the honest broker, often via committees again, who seeks to expand or at least clarify the scope of choices for decision makers by integrating scientific knowledge with stakeholders concerned. Neutrality, I guess no increased risk of lack of impartiality, and I don't know about perception of impartiality. Let me focus now on, which I think is a very common figure of scientific expertise nowadays. It's the issue advocate. Here you use your status as a scientist, you use your status to argue for a cause or line of actions. So you align yourself with a group seeking, for instance, you may align yourself with a group seeking to advance its interest. For instance, as a scientist defending biodiversity, you might campaign against the building of a highway in a certain place. So you are an issue advocate. You don't want the highway. You think this kind of biodiversity in this place should be preserved. Okay, so here, this is very clear. You don't want to be neutral. It's quite the opposite. This is assumed neutrality. Perception of increased risk of lack of impartiality. Again, I'm repeating myself, I don't know. It's plausible to say that you might have an increased risk of increased perception of that. And let me say a bit more about the increased risk of lack of impartiality. When you choose to be an issue advocate. Okay, so this is an intermediary conclusion, but this is the second one, it's going to be much shorter. Don't worry. So what to expect in a democracy about this form of political engagement of scientists when you choose to be an issue advocate? Not very originally. Well, of course, you can expect transparency, so you can expect to be open about the fact that you are not a pure scientist and you don't pretend to be a pure scientist. You do want to prevent the building of this highway, and you produce the knowledge in support of, not building the highways because it impacts biodiversity in such and such a way. So you're not a pure scientist giving advice to or giving knowledge to the decision makers. You're, in that sense, an issue advocate. So it would be nice to be, it's okay with that, but it would be nice to be transparent on where you are, where you stand in this typology. Another, I think, crucial issue is not so much, if I go back to the last question, increased risk of lack of impartiality. The question is not so much about, as an individual scientist or a group of scientists, because that increase a risk of lack of impartiality. But on a more global level, what you need, and I think it's really important, you do need pluralism of issue advocacies in a well-functioning democracy. What do I mean? It's some aspects of a phenomenon, and that goes back to global impartiality. Some aspects of a phenomenon may be understudied because it is unlikely to serve the interest of, say, private funders, or because also, and more interestingly, it is unlikely to be deemed interesting enough by the scientific community. That will give you a nice paper on Nature of Science. Make it too simple. Okay. So there are a few interesting contributions in that vein. And for instance, Bieder in the paper mentioned here, he gave the example, Bieder gave the example of GMO, genetically modified organism. And when you have to take a decision about, do we go for GMO or don't we go for GMO? This is very important for the decision maker to have good knowledge about, for instance, potential negative impact on the environment and biodiversity, and not to have only good knowledge, or vice versa, depending on your political view, or to have only good knowledge about how it will improve crop or yield productivity. Okay, so what's important is to have good expertise on every dimension of the program, and it's very often not the case for many reasons. So the overall, what is at stake here, when you go for issue advocacy, is to prevent this, to minimize global impartiality issues, and to make sure that the overall production of scientific expertise is not unbalanced, depending on the play of power relation of various actors. Just to give another example, I don't know if it was also debated in cities in Greece, but in some cities in France, the mayor has to decide whether to keep the light on during the night. And if you expect this decision to be based on good science, you need good science about the impact on turning off the light on the insects, the life of insects, for instance, but you might also need to have good scientific expertise on the impact on how people will how people will interact in the streets and all that. So you do need that. So it's important that you keep that in mind. Okay. So let's move now to the last form of political engagement. Activist research. All right, so here clearly there's a strong perception of, I believe, but again, I don't have no empirical inputs here. You might have a strong perception of a lack of impartiality. This is also an assumed non-neutrality. You're an activist, so you produce knowledge in direct support of your line of action, your desired line of action. Here you are not only engaged as a scientist, but you also engage as a citizen in the sense that the potential impact stemming from the researcher's social capital, hopefully we still have social capital, and it's not directly from here or her privilege in this position. So to a certain extent, somebody else could do it for you, but you still have some special contribution. But that's not really that. Okay, so assume non-neutrality, and so the key question, of course, is quid of an increased risk of impartiality. So same question that is issue advocate, and this is there is a continuum between the issue advocate and activist research position. Okay, so there's two ways to go. No, I mean, in the current literature there are two ways to go. It's not exhaustive at all, but just to shape the discussion. You can choose to, you can have the following position. As a scientist, this is a professional duty to avoid activist research because it increases the risk of lack of impartiality, it increases the risk of questionable research practice, and very importantly, it is likely to increase the risk of an increased perception of lack of impartiality. And is it good or bad for democracy? Well, it's certainly, it has been discussed in previous sessions. Okay, so this is the first way to go, very roughly. Another way to go is to say, okay, no, this is you can't ask a scientist not to be politically engaged. it's a right, it's a whatever. So what the main concern then is to find a way, mechanism internal to the functioning of scientific communities to strengthen the reliability of the activist research by developing, internal control mechanisms, guidelines to mitigate a higher risk of impartiality. As we all know, it comes back, to the first slides. We do have these mechanisms to keep inferences of non-epistemic values under control, even when there is no political engagement in play. This kind of mechanism, are they good enough in the case of politically, like peer review, sorry, like the usual thing, peer review, reproducibility, and skeptical organism, organized skepticism. By Merton, we all know all this control mechanism we have in scientific communities. Are they enough in that case? Do we need other ones? And which ones? And if we manage to go this way, then you can have both the political engagement and the claim of impartiality founding epistemic superiority and legitimacy. And again, key empirical questions, so I'd be happy to discuss that. Quid of the impact on the credibility and trustworthiness of science if you do not go for the first option. Okay? And I'm almost done. Okay, 2 minutes, yeah, okay. So I'm going to skip that, but that's okay. Conclusive remarks. Okay. So again, what to expect in a democracy about political engagement of scientists. That's what I just mentioned too briefly. If you go for the second option, like try to mitigate the risk of increased impartiality, then we have to really think harder about this social mechanism in scientific communities to keep impartiality under control, to keep the influence of your values, your states under control. And this is certainly a very interesting field of work for philosophy of science, and Nancy Carter has started working on that. Again, transparency of the chosen role by experts, if we are talking about political engagement as an expert. I come back to this challenge of reducing the gap between science outputs and society's needs. In other words, reduce the gap to us because we are clearly, not clearly, yes, it needs to be argued for, but we are clearly not in a state of well-ordered science. If we manage a normative view for many reasons, let's try to reduce this gap. And so which means avoid the emergence of global impartiality or neglected areas of research topic. Again, setting very concretely, in some countries you have part of the parliament which has like kind of scientific committees. So you can play with the existing devices, democratic devices, to try to address this question of neglected areas of research topics. I will say more about that. And this is my last slide. This is very unconclusive, even more unconclusive than previous remarks. Recently, we had in France this call from French researchers in the newspaper Le Monde. French researchers, and famous ones, call for a Manhattan project for ecological transition. So saying, okay, this is the emergency. Let's stop funding that and that. Let's put all the eggs in the same net. And so this was the Manhattan project. That raised a lot of discussion in France. Should we do that or not? If we do that, what's interesting, and I'd be happy to discuss that with you, is if we go along this line, this is kind of going back to epistemic elitism in the sense Philip Kitcher formulated it, like the wise expert. This is in relation to Bacon, the New Atlantis. The wise experts can be expected to know what's objectively in human interest. And for instance, for this science, this is putting all the eggs in the panier of the ecological transition, which we might share. This is not the point. We share this political option or not. This is not the point. The point is that it is a major democratic challenge, because I don't know in Greece, but in France, in the United States, in many countries, it's not like the academic world. Political preferences reflect the political preferences of the rest of society. And you see when people vote, it's not exactly how we wish, or some, usually the academic world votes. So, quid of this gap between the researchers' preferences, which are much more homogeneous than the rest of the population, and the preferences of other components of society. In other words, it seems that we can't have it both ways, like trying to reduce this gap by following what we think is in the interest of the rest of the society, and taking seriously democratic expectation. And this is very uncomfortable, I think. Thank you. the national level, from the national level, in fact, with the INR. Who sits in the committee in the INR? Mostly scientists. And when someone reviews your funding project, so far, let's keep that, you get reviews from your peers. So I think we shouldn't say it's the funding bodies as they are like from Mars, and we are like submitted to their. No. We have to take responsibility, especially if we're at a certain stage of a career. For instance, when we hire people, I guess it's the same in Greece. Who sits at the table when you hire them? It's not, I don't know, someone else, it's us. And so, and I know it's not that simple, but yeah, I know it's not that simple, of course, but I think we can't just say the funding bodies impose that on us or whatever. I mean, and let's hope it's descriptively still the case that the funding bodies, we are still part of the game. And it's also, when you can as a scientist say, okay, I want to stay in the pure basic research quadrant. But then this is something you can discuss for many reasons. I think we should discuss that and all that. So the fact is that, for instance, it's public money, so maybe it's not only about following our curiosity. We might have, accounts. Well, we have expectation to meet. It's public money, and what we do impacts society. So it's not like it's so easy to say, okay, give me money, I follow my curiosity, and I don't care about how it impacts or not the rest of society. It's a bit difficult in 2024 to defend this pure basic research platform. You can defend it on epistemological grounds, saying, okay, science is unpredictable, and so, okay, so this would be another talk. I don't remember that. It's be another talk. So, yeah, let's take responsibility and again, Pasteur is very interesting, an interesting figure in this way, to show that we don't have to choose between being socially relevant and doing fundamental research. This is a route. This is not the good way to think about fundamental research.
Thank you very much. I am interested by the honest broker model. Don't you think there is a singularity in this quadrant in the diagram we've shown? Because in the other world, I would say that the scientist, who is also a citizen, is perfectly equipped to be a science arbiter or pure scientist or an issue advocate. So it's sufficient to be a citizen, a reasonable citizen, and to be a scientist. But if you are an empirical scientist, you are not automatically competent in the normative sciences like jurisprudence, moral and political philosophy, or normative economics. And I don't quite see how you could be a honest broker without relying on the existing bodies of science, just being a kind of amateur scientist outside the empirical science.
But you do rely in each of these squares. You do rely on your scientific knowledge, and the honest broker is. I just repeat what your says is that the idea is really like that stands in contrast with the issue advocate. Issue advocate, you in favor of a line of action. You're going to produce the knowledge in support of that. In this case, and this goes back to pluralism of expertise. So what you need, and it can be only via committee, it can be just a single individual doing that. You have to broaden the scope of choices for decision makers. You know, it's like and not defining a particular course of actions. Okay, but you are not in the linear model. That's what's important, because to start with, you do have more than one option, well supported by good scientific knowledge.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much. So really beautiful talk and beautiful notes, and I wrote like 5, 10 points already. But I'll ask one that's kind of particularly interesting to me on the industrial. So rather than this kind of break that you have, to look perhaps at the kind of industrial scale of scientific endeavor and the industrial applications of it, and all these kind of deliverables and their ability as an industrial kind of efficiency and sort of government, like that you have to have the same quality of product every time. And just how is that the industrial sense of living has permeated so much science that it's kind of dehisced completely, in my opinion, from its original understanding and original engagement with life, and into something completely different. And I'm not kind of, by the way, advocating that it was kind of pure goodness. I mean, Claude Bernard is the typical scientist, and his wife and daughter left him after he was vivisecting all these dogs and cats and so on. So for sure there's some kind of brutality in the science, even on its kind of individual kind of level, but on that scale that it's being done. Wellcome Trust is throwing billions every year, and a couple of thousand for some kind of public understanding of science. And it doesn't really want to expand the methodologies, but the scientific kind of world is kind of focusing in, like animal studies, pharmaceutical, it's establishing domains of action, not just domains of knowledge. So.
Yeah, but again, back to that passport program, we can have it both ways. I mean, I'm not sure what you have in mind when you talk about the original understanding of science, in contrast with this industrial scale of scientific endeavor. What is this original understanding of science you have in mind?
I mean, you talked about a disconnection from life to some extent, or from.
Maybe not. When I talk about the gap between scientific outputs and the needs of society, I wouldn't say anything about that, but it goes back to the many reasons why you think you are not in a state of well-ordered science, in the sense that there are neglected diseases, neglected topics in science. Think about medicine, for instance, anyway, this is something that used to be in the wall, in the painting of the yeah. Just to give you a concrete example, it took a long time to have good knowledge, good scientific knowledge about the impact on health when we live in houses or apartments with a lead in the painting. Lead in the painting. Why didn't we put more? Why did it take so long to have scientific expertise and take the actions on it? It's because, to make the story too simple, it's because people living in this kind of apartment, they didn't have, usually they didn't end up as scientists, they didn't have, it was poor people, they didn't have relation with powerful people, or for that matter, scientists. So this kind of topic was not, had not been for a long time on the radar of public science. Let's not expect that from private science, but from public science, it was not on the radar. Not because there are many people not wanting it, who didn't want this topic to be on the radar science. It's because, maybe scientists were not aware of this problem, or if you are aware, and this is something else, it might not be interesting enough in the sense that you won't get a breakthrough by studying that. So, you don't really engage with that. And I know this one answer. Okay, so that's what I want to know. So that's why you end up with neglected subject, and I think it's a responsibility of public research to try to identify
advocating a certain issue. I mean, but that does not, I mean, it's only to warn us or what? I mean, to, we don't get it by ourselves and he or she should tell us that, so it's not, I mean, I think from the point of view of better science, we shouldn't care what the investigator, I mean, the researcher says.
Well, I would say that we are still talking here about activist research. That means you want to produce a discourse which is better. I mean, you want to have reasons to claim that the discourse you produce on the fact of life or on the world is more, people should trust it more, not in an absolute sense, but more than other kind of discourse or other kind of sources of discourse on the world. So you want to keep this advantage, okay? And so that's where does this comparative advantage come from? It does come, and this is the social view of objectivity in science. It comes from the fact that, so nothing original, it comes from the fact that as scientific communities, we do have like control by peers and all that to minimize the influence of personal values. So this is a social view of objectivity since Popper, Merton, and all that. And this is and so this is a key ingredient of science. If you want to keep this epistemic legitimacy, epistemic superiority.
Yeah, but is it just rhetoric then? I mean, just to persuade more easily, whereas that's not.
Well, it's not more or less rhetorical than in science when it is not openly linked to a political cause. I mean, if you think this is just rhetorical, this idea of peer reviewing and that, and this is not really grounding any epistemic legitimacy, yes, this is on the part. I mean, this is on the part. But if you think if it's not rhetorical all that, and it does ground an advantage of scientific discourses, then you have to worry about how to mitigate this kind of influence of non-epistemic values, also in the case of activist research, as you have to do it in the case of, non-activist research. You do have to do it, and it's not like objectivity. It doesn't come from individual attitudes, and the same will go for activist research. It will not come from individual attitudes. It will come from collective mechanism of control, as in science in general. Colleagues I'm in an institution where students get very easy PhD money, good for them, but so that means they are very free. It's a very selective institution, so they're right there, okay, I'm going to, full of Nobel Prizes, so they're here, okay, I want to get a Nobel Prize too, but now the new generation, they don't, they say, okay, maybe not this Nobel Prize, I want to be useful, but how? And this is not the cultural way to, so this is really, I think, raising interesting question, concrete question, like, do I give up on this research topic? That means maybe I won't have the good papers in 2 years, but I engage in a less sexy research topic, but I think it's more important for that and that reason. And it's a heavy choice for them. more significant than others. So it's just to fit each other. And why do we think that some truths are worth being found out? This is the question of the significant truth. You know, it's not only for purely epistemic reasons, it's because at some stage in the history of a society, you will value certain aims. And that will change, of course. And so it's a non-objectivist view of the aims of science. It's not like they are intrinsic value, it's really a non-objectivist view of the aims of science. So what is significant depends on what happens to be the interests and the preferences of the society at a certain stage of its history. So it's non-objectivist in that sense. And I'm happy with that. And also, well, to define what is a better world, I will not do that, but that's okay because my approach is much more modest. It's just if you agree that there is this gap, we can do better, we're not in the state of well-ordered science, then what can we do just to reduce the gap a little bit? And this idea of having an observatory of neglected disease, to be, as a scientist, politically engaged when you think about, when you pick up your research topic, this is no grand action. You don't have to be in a completely different society or political system to work on that. So to that extent, I don't know what is a better word, but I do know that there are, for reasons we can document, that there are neglected topics, and I think it's a responsibility of public research to be more concerned with this question of neglected topics of research.
This is going to be the last question. I'm sorry, Vanessa.
Thank you for your talk. I have a question about the first bubble, I suppose.
Not the ugly one. Okay. Which one?
No, the
Quadron? No.
No, with the so the way to that okay. The steering of research choice of research topics.
Yeah.
So I agree. I see why you argue that this might be the most impactful way of political engagement. I have a question though, because here you suggest that the engagement comes in the form of choosing particular topics over others. But I'm thinking topics are not just questions sitting on a shelf and you pick one. You formulate those topics in a very specific way. And this also relates to what you say about neglected topics. So I think not only of topics like, I'm going to research whether there is no climate change, or I'm going to research something in favor of creationism, but also has a chance idea that I need to put money to what's it called? Phlogiston, right? So do we want to allow these kind of research questions? Is it a form of political engagement to put them aside? They are neglected topics. So in principle, should we allow them to develop as well? What is your thought?
Yeah. This is clearly underlies this notion of choice of research topics. I agree with you. I would say that the criteria for a topic to be neglected is not so much in an epistemic sense that we should keep working on phlogiston or to try to see if it's fruitful. It's more like we can. When I say we, it's not scientists anymore. It's like politicians, and we can identify, or we should try harder to identify topics which are not research questions per se, but which are issues that can be partly addressed or better addressed with more reliable knowledge. It's like my example of disease-led disease, So the problem is an exogenous problem. It's not a problem internal to the development of a discipline. That's something you have to solve, and you have reason to think that to some extent science can contribute, not solve it, of course, it's not science, and so you, rather than choosing an endogenous problem, exciting from the internal point of view of the development of the discipline. You say, okay, this is something I need to address, even if it doesn't not easily. Even if it's not easy to translate it into a good research question, you know, and so neglecting it in that sense, in the responding to social or political needs rather than epistemic values.
Information session during the lunch break, 3 to 4. So don't miss it. There will be lunch provided. We have with us Margarita Letsis, who is Assistant Commissioner at the ERC, Professor Sonia Smes will give a talk online, Professor Vasu Kundi, as a former panel member, will give a presentation, so it will be very, very good.
Thanks to you.
Second, there's going to be a dinner now for those of you who made the reservations. If you haven't paid for the dinner fee, you can do it at the gate. Okay, go there at 9 o'clock. We have sent an email with guidelines. And third, tomorrow there are some transportation disruptions. I've been told some central metro stations will be closed. So Google it and see if there is some problem.
Why are they closed? But why are they closed?
That was funny. Back home when we close the bus stand or a metro station, and I get there all sitting there looking
Αύριο θα έχω στικάκι. Αύριο.
at